everybody. Welcome to Horror 101 with Dr. AC. And this is the first installment of our Happy Anniversary program, where we're going to be highlighting films that are celebrating a significant anniversary. And in this case, we are celebrating George Romero's 1973, The Crazies. I wanted to call it a hit, but it was not a hit at the time, which is a damn shame because this is a great, great movie. Here to talk to me about it is my pal, Josh Zagoren. There he is.
Hello. How are you?
That was I got so freaked out, even introducing you. I got all choked up. So anyway, you had actually, I threw out a bunch of 1973 films, and you were the one who highlighted The Crazies. And I got to say, I was like, I've seen it a few times, but coming back to it, I was like, wow, this movie is so good.
I remember seeing the 2010 remake first and wondering why no one was talking about that movie, because it came out and no one cared, and this is right before Timothy Olyphant became an even bigger thing,
right?
Because I think Deadwood was on at the time. I think that's right, because Deadwood would have been, maybe it would have been almost over, I think, by then. But I saw that movie in the theater just on a whim, just to go to see, because new horror movie, gotta go watch. And I was like, I didn't know this was, A, I didn't know it was a remake, B, I didn't know it was a George Romero movie. And then I just remember sitting there going, why is this not a popular movie? So then I went back and saw the 1973 one, and I was like, well, why are we not talking about that movie? Because, what a wild ride,
Yeah.
So, when I saw that was on the list, I jumped on that, because I love this movie.
What was interesting is I hadn't seen them back to back as I did in prep for this. And because I remember seeing The Crazies in the theater, and thinking that it was pretty well done, solid, efficient action, horror flick. And then I went back and watched this again. I'm like, this is such a different beast.
Yeah.
And I will say, I'm going to celebrate the original more than the remake, although I think the remake is solid. There are some things that happened in the remake that I'm like, that seems so very, I don't trust the viewer. We need to, So anyway, let's jump into
this goofy thing?
the new Arrow. Well, it's not newish. It's a couple years old, but they came out with a box set called Between Night and Dawn. And it was highlighting Season of the Witch, There's Always Vanilla, and this film, The Crazies, which was kind of his interim before he went back around to horror with Martin and then Dawn of the Dead.
Yeah.
So this film's kind of in that netherworld where he wasn't really hitting. Night of the Living Dead was so huge, and then Jack's Wife, which is Season of the Witch, There's Always Vanilla, and this film, The Crazies. None of them really took off. And on the one hand, I can understand why The Crazies didn't necessarily land with a mass audience, because it's pretty much a downer and there's no real names in it. So I could see how it might not have caught on. But in looking at those films, I go, The Crazies just is so good.
Yeah.
And looking back on it 50 years later, the editing is crazy. And it was a film, it doesn't even have time for its own opening credits. It gives you 3 opening credits, and then it's like...
I did not... So my version of The Crazies that I watched had the original title. And that sent me down...
Codename Trixie?
Codename Trixie. I thought I was hallucinating. I thought I was losing my mind. I was like, wait a minute. I've never seen that before. Yeah. And then I went on a deep Google dive, and I can't find any reason why they changed the title outside of the fact that the name of the movie was originally Codename Trixie, which doesn't seem to nail it.
Actually, and this is the because I think it was called The Crazies, and then that died, and then they called it Codename Trixie in an effort to get more people. And I was like, no, that's not the way to go. Codename Trixie is not going to be the answer to this.
Yeah, I was like, did I accidentally download some old 70s exploitation kind of film, like blank exploitation, whatever exploitation at the time in the 70s was happening? I was like, is this gonna be one of those Foxy Boxing kind of situations? I'm confused. And then it started, and I noticed some of the actors, and I was like, oh, okay. So Trixie, that makes sense because blah 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 blah. That's I don't know. We'll get into that, but yeah.
Yeah, oh yeah, we'll get into it.
And stuff like that.
There's a reason. There's a reason it's called Codename Trixie.
And it's not what you'd think. But yeah, no, that was jarring at first. I love that was their attempt to make people go see this movie.
Yeah, right.
Because like the original screenplay was called, because I was doing my thing, Mad People. I think was the original name of the screenplay. Which is still a better title than Codename Trixie.
I agree. But Codename Trixie, so to kind of give us a brief synopsis for those who haven't seen this 50-year-old film, which you should.
Yeah, spoilers.
Is that we've got a spoilers banner already. But it basically starts off in Evans City, Pennsylvania, which is where the graveyard for Night of the Living Dead is located. But it's a small town in Pennsylvania, and people are starting to, they're starting to get a little crazy. However, it mostly starts off with people, kind of like the military showing up and saying, we anticipate things are going to go south. There is the weird scene where there's the two kids at the house with the dad going wild, and you're like, okay, what's going on there? But then you find out that the military has known about this, that there was a crash nearby, that this experimental bioweapon codenamed Trixie have been released into the water, and they're worried that it's going to cause problems for the population. So they're coming in, they're trying to lock the city down, and therein things kick off and this is where I feel like this film levels up versus the remake. And we'll talk more about the remake in a second, because we know what's happening and we're actually relating to everybody. We're relating to the military trying to lock things down. We're relating to the people who don't want to be locked down. We're relating to the people who are sick. We're relating to the people who are confused and scared and aren't getting any information. Whereas the remake becomes very much, we identify with this group of people, and everybody else is the bad guy. If you're infected, if you are military, if you're, whatever, we're just going to identify with this group of people. Whereas the Crazies, 1973, we actually want the military to lock things down. We are rooting for them. The only people we're really not rooting for are the bureaucrats who are coming up with, well, if we need to nuke the town, here's how we would do it.
But we don't want that. No, I'm reminded of that movie Cabin in the Woods. There's I think it's Drew Goddard who directed it. There's a director's commentary with him and Joss Whedon, unfortunately. But the two of them are talking about the movie, and Drew Goddard says something that I think relates to what you're talking about, and this like really interesting thing that Romero does in a lot of his movies, where you're not entirely sure whose side you, the audience, are supposed to be on yet. There's a scene in Cabin in the Woods where the Scooby Gang is trying to get out of the tunnel, like they're driving through the tunnel, and you the audience, still don't fully understand what's going on yet. Like you're not 100% sure the end game of that movie, but you know that the place is under control from this place that Bradley Whitford and
Richard
Jenkins are kicking ass and being wonderful. But that those two are controlling what's happening, but you're not entirely sure to what end. And you're assuming that you're supposed to not like Richard Jenkins and Bradley Whitford because they're in suits and they're being spooky. But there's this switch in the movie, and Drew's talking about that this is his favorite part of the film, where the gang, it's Chris Hemsworth is driving everybody out of the tunnel, and then it cuts to Richard Jenkins and Bradley Whitford going, why isn't the tunnel blown? And then Richard Jenkins has this intense panic moment and goes running down the hall, and at that moment, you're nervous for them. Right. And you're nervous for the heroes that you're following. You're like, oh, what's wrong? Like, this doesn't feel like, those dang kids are getting away. This feels like bigger stakes. And it feels like that for me when you're watching the Crazies, that when the middle of the movie, like the meat of the film, when the government and then like all those white suits with those masks and they're super creepy are fighting with the people that you've been following, but you kind of see where they're both coming from.
Right.
And it's just this awesome like chaos that he does in Night of the Living Dead too, where you're like, I mean, I get it. I get why these guys are freaking out. So
Yeah.
you
Yeah,
know,
and that's the thing. Like we're in with the military. We're dealing with Colonel Peckham, and like he's trying to lock things down, and everything has just there's just like these little missteps where they grab basically one of the head guys who created the Trixie virus, and they pull him into
right.
Evans City, and he's like, "I'm no good here. I need to be back at the lab where I have all my facilities." But the order was we need to get a Trixie person to Evans City. Doesn't matter. Grab the first one you can. And so the wrong guy ends up in the wrong place at the wrong time. And he's played by oh shoot, I'm blanking on his name. He's one of the there he is, Richard France,
Richard
who
France.
who shows up later in Dawn of the Dead,
That's
with his
the guy.
eye patch.
He was yeah, he's the eye. I knew that. Like as soon as I saw him, I was like, oh, it's eye patch guy from Dawn of the Dead.
Yep.
But he's also in Night of the Living Dead as one of the zombies, but he's uncredited, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah, and but you just start to see these moments where it's like, but you're relating. That's the thing. We're relating to the military. We're relating to the scientists, and we're relating to the locals.
Right.
And we're like, oh man, but we have to shut this. We have to keep this virus from spreading. It's important, and of course that takes on even greater resonance now. In our COVID age, where you're like, really, I need you to just shut down your personal freedom just a little bit so that we can all live.
Right.
Yeah,
you can't say avoid it like the plague anymore, because it turns out we're not super awesome at that.
We're not good at avoiding like the plague.
Yeah.
In fact, we embrace the plague.
We love it. Please bring us more plague.
But anyway, yes, I was referring to the editing earlier. Like it is so cut, and there's such momentum that gets generated. Here's another way I feel like this one differs from the remake, is that when people go crazy, there are some people who go obviously crazy, but there's some people who they just seem like they're a little off.
That guy with the white hair walking around by the gas pump.
Yeah.
Just like, come on in, everybody in. I was like, oh, is he like just drunk, or
he's like the town drunk, or is he crazy?
Or is he got the crazies?
Right. And I think that's whereas you watch the 2010 remake, and it's so obvious, like people basically, they're zombies, or they're just dead in the eyes, or they're a combination of the two. Whereas here, like what happens where it seems to show up is like people have kind of fits of emotion, like strong emotion. We have our main characters. We have two. We have a former Green Beret, David, and we have a former Army guy named Clank. And those are our two guys.
Two walking hamburgers, like just dude meat all over this movie.
And they're both members of the volunteer fire department. And David is with Judy, who is a nurse who's pregnant.
Right.
And then they are joined by Artie and Kathy.
Kathy, yeah.
Richard Liberty, who would later show up as Dr. Frankenstein in Day of the Dead.
Oh.
And Lynn Lowry, who you've seen in I Drink Your Blood and David Cronenberg's The Shivers, exactly. Right. So, but anyway, so Scream Queen royalty. But anyway, so the five of them are kind of on the run, and you see, Lynn Lowry's character kind of just starts kind of smiling and laughing inappropriate things. But it's not like she goes dead-eyed, and so you're kind of like, zombie. Is she crazy? Is she not crazy? Richard Liberty's character, he's kind of like, he's a little more affectionate toward his daughter than maybe he should be. But you're like, was that him always, or is that just? And it's like, does the crazy make you just more of what you already were? What are the symptoms?
And then you get like, which I think is what Romero does really well with creating chaos. Is that you, the audience, are going, I don't know how I can trust or not trust anyone, because everyone's acting a little insane. So is everybody affected? So who am I? It's kind of like that ambiguous ending in The Thing, where you're just kind of like, I don't know. And I normally don't like ambiguity in horror, like endings and things like that. And I think that this just makes this vibe makes it all the more upsetting. Like this movie was upsetting, uh,
Yeah.
because it's just chaos. You don't know who to believe. You don't know what to believe
Well, and
because
it's
there's no answers.
yeah, and it's super frustrating for everybody. Like
Right.
the military come in, they're like, I need to set up a perimeter, blah, 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 blah. This is how this will work. And it's like, well, we don't have that. And you're like, well, I need that. And it's like, well, we don't have that. And the same thing with the scientist. He's like, I need to be able to have this, this, and this. And they're like, well, we can't.
Sorry.
It's like, yeah, but I need to send this out. Nope, we can't do that. And you're like, oh my God.
We're all gonna die.
And they have this great voice. They have this voice imprint that just keeps coming. Every time they want to have clearance to talk on a different line, they have to go through this whole voice imprint clearance.
Right.
And it's like, I can't let you talk to this other person because you'd have to do another voice imprint. And you're like, are you kidding me? Like the bureaucracy. And I mean, I know Romero, lovely liberal leaning Romero, like he has no patience for bureaucracy.
No, he doesn't. It doesn't seem like he digs on the government very much. That reminded me of this is a stretch, but go with me. That reminded me of Shin Godzilla that came out. A couple years
absolutely.
ago, and how the majority of that movie is different offices arguing with each other, and while there's just madness outside. And I remember that really disturbing me. Like,
yes.
I thought Shin Godzilla was fun. I think there was I had some issues with some of the look and some of the vibe of the movie where I was like, why are they doing that? That's such a weird effect. But anyway,
sure.
But the scenes where you were in, which is most of the movie, where you're in the different rooms and everyone's arguing, was making me ill. I was like, oh, this is too real. I hate this. This is how we die.
We can't progress because there's no progress.
Ugh. I hate it. This movie today, because I watched the original one today to prep for this. I knew the story. I just forgotten how like chaotic and real it was, and especially nowadays, like living through 2020 and seeing where we are in the country right now, just going, oh gosh, that's way too close. I don't like it.
Right. Well, and kind of, I mean, of course, any Contagion film is going to now have new resonance.
Sure.
But I thought it was interesting that, like some people don't exhibit symptoms.
Right.
Some people seem to be fine until they're not fine, or like, is it airborne? Is it through the water?
Is it
like
the water?
how is this happening?
Yeah, it's that invisible enemy. It's almost Lovecraftian, right? Like it's cosmic, weird. There's something there, but we don't really know how to quantify it. It's just sort of we know what's going to happen if you get it, but what happens when you get it varies as well. But we know that eventually you have to die. Right? Like, we don't know if you're going to go nuts and try to eat your kids, but we do know that eventually they're going to have to kill you.
Yeah.
And they show, oh gosh, there's that awful scene where the parents are that little boy that comes out, and his dad runs out and tries shooting at the guy at the military, and then the military kills them, and it kills the mother, and then the little kid's just like, Mom, and you're like, ugh. And then there's flamethrowers, and we're just watching these guys burn bodies. Yeah, it was gruesome. I forgot how gruesome that movie was.
Well, and we get into I think it's lovely watching Romero kind of have his cake and eat it too, because we understand that the people in the white suits are working for the greater good, yet we're watching them gun down, innocent people. We also see them kind of like looting and like going through their victims' like wallets and cars. There's that one great scene where they do like a little home invasion, and the guy like decides he's gonna steal like the fishing rod. Yeah. And I was like, wow.
I was like, is that supposed to be funny? Because I think it's hilarious, but
it's
I'm also like,
funny.
Damn.
Mm-hmm.
The music in that movie was something else to me, because there was like there's this like ongoing like classic almost 1940s military drummage that just keeps happening throughout the film, that it somehow it made the movie feel to me like it was darker than it is, even though it's a very dark movie, because it was like almost having fun, like almost like a what's that show? Not maybe Mannix. I'm trying to think. It was like there's like those '70s like dude, $6 Million Man kind of thing where it's almost like we're the superheroes, but you know that there's just chaos going around. So you're going, why is this music? Why is it heroic? But there's nothing heroic happening,
Right.
and it ooged me. It was oogie.
Well, Bruce Roberts is credited with the music, and that's a great time to kind of shift gears to kind of behind the camera because Romero wrote, directed, and edited the film. It's shot. It was the first time in Romero's career that he did not perform his own cinematography. This was performed by Bill Hinsman, who most people know as the cemetery zombie from Night of the Living Dead.
I didn't know that. That's awesome.
He shot the film.
Whoa.
So, it's like, and this was kind of, the great thing about Romero is just by coincidence, I came across Night Riders and I went, oh my gosh, like there's Clank, Clank's in Night Riders as well. It's like, I love that Romero kind of like had his little ensemble of people both before and behind the camera that he just kept bringing along. And this is very much kind of like vintage Romero where he's still figuring it out.
Yeah. Well, because so this is 73.
Yep.
And when was Night? When was Night of the Living Dead?
68.
So but what did he do? What did he do in between? Because we haven't gotten to. Did he do Dawn before Crazies or after Crazies?
Dawn of the Dead came out in 78, 79.
Okay. That's when we're getting into
right,
like his commercial work. Where like this
right. Martin was 76. Well, I mean, and people would say that the reason why he did Dawn was that he needed to make some money. He needed to have a hit.
Right.
And Dario Argento's like, you should do a remake or do a sequel.
Do a sequel. Make your movies.
But yeah, so Crazies was not his best years.
No, is this when he did the amusement park, or was that in the 80s?
Amusement Park that was 70s still,
okay.
And that was an industrial film,
right?
Or not an industrial film, but like a PSA.
PSA, right?
Yeah.
I finally got around to watching that, and I really enjoyed it.
No, it's great.
I just think it's a hard watch because you need those like that period of movie, that kind of movie demands that you can't just like have it on. It's not fun. I was like, oh man, this movie's deep. I hate it.
Yeah. It's and I think that Crazies kind of hits that sweet spot. And again, I'm kind of like, why don't we talk about it more? And that was your comment, was like, I feel like this movie does not get talked about enough.
No.
And I agree, because it allows us to have the social commentary. It allows to have a human face on things.
Right.
And it allows us to also kind of have that zombie, the other, both in the case of our white suited military and in the case of the people who have gotten the virus.
Yeah, because when you first meet the white suits, you are, the vibe that you get is that these are the bad guys, right? These are the villains. And then you kind of don't know what to think, because you sort of think that maybe they're doing a good job, but they're also not doing it very effectively. And it's also because that thing can't be effectively taken care of.
Right.
And then it throws you into that. The movie itself feels like it's trying to figure out what to do, and that, I think, is what sets this apart from your standard zombie infected 28 days later kind of vibe. It's like, oh no, who knows who's going to make it out of this? There's no rules here.
Right. Well, and we don't know yet. Later our scientist, Richard France, tells us that like you're either going to die crazy or you're going to die, period.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's zombie movies and mob movies, right? There's only two ways out, right? You're either going to make it or you're not going to make it. And I just thought that scene was super depressing. He's just like, you're either going to die crazy or die. And I'm like, that could be said for life.
And that's the thing. We're seeing the white suits facing off against regular people. They haven't turned.
Yeah.
Like they are still. Yeah, exactly. They're just defending their civil rights. They're like, you don't get to just come in and kick us off our land. And so they defend themselves. And on the one hand, you're like, well, I relate to that. On the other hand, there's a public health crisis going on. I relate to that as well.
That whole sequence where they're like tossing homes and just like literally throwing people out of their like ottomans. Oh, the wallpaper in those scenes was jarring. Just the general, everyone's in a nightie, and then there's that like one guy who's in his pajamas reading the paper. I was like, oh man,
Yeah.
don't hurt that guy. He's just
Yeah.
he's having coffee. Leave him alone.
Well, and that's the thing. Like, and I think that's what people were afraid of in 2020.
Yeah, sure.
They thought, okay, like you've locked us all in our house instead of, like trying to move us all to the high school.
Right.
But it was the same feeling of like, what do you mean I can't go out of my house? It's like, you can't go out of your house.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that there was a conflation during all of that in 2020 where people are like, the government's forcing me to stay in. And I'm like, no, you can go outside. There's no one kicking you in the door. They're just saying you can't gather because we will get sick.
Right.
But I feel like in this, like, that bizarre, right-wing conservative mind, it is that scene from the Crazies.
Yeah.
And I'm like, do you think that's what's going on right now? That is not what's going on right now.
Right. Well, what's
but
interesting is
if you've seen that movie and it triggered you, and then somebody's like, "Hey, man, lockdown," I'm like, "Yeah," because that movie's really effective at making you nervous about things.
Well, and what's funny is like it's funny you talk about gathering, like they put everybody in the same.
Put everybody in the same room.
It's like everybody's okay. Everybody's sick now. You've just infected the entire town. Good job.
Yeah, I don't think anyone knows what they're doing, and I feel like that's the true terror of this movie is that no one has an answer. Like, we don't know. We're just gonna panic and lose our minds and go crazy, and everyone does. Yeah. And I hear you on the 2010 thing being too simple, too easy.
Yeah. I think
like that's right. Yeah.
It doesn't it's so obvious when people are sick.
Oh yeah, because they get like the bulgy eyes and the veins. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because they almost kind of turn into zombies, and you're like, well, okay.
So it's a zombie movie.
Exactly. Well, and this movie, of course, was hot on the heels of Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead remake.
Right.
And if you look
28 days later, right? We're coming off of like now we have, because that was like now we have fast zombies. Now we have the fast infected.
Well, Dawn of the Dead was 2004. 28 Days Later was 2002. So like it was ripe.
Yeah.
But we also
stopped having walkers in zombie movies.
Right.
Big ups to The Last of Us, by the way. If you haven't been watching that show, it's excellent, and there's a lot of like Walker-esque classic zombie moments on that show.
For sure. The so with the remake, which was 2010.
Yeah.
Directed by
I also
Brett
love
Eisner.
that tagline: "Fear thy neighbor." It's rife. Ugh.
Now, what's interesting is because I didn't know this at the time, or if I did, I'd forgotten it. But Scott Kosar, who was the screenwriter, he did Texas Chainsaw, the remake. He did the Amityville Horror remake. He did a couple of episodes of The Haunting of Hill House for Netflix.
I didn't know that. That's cool.
And I'm like, this guy is the guy you call when you want to update that film or that show.
Yeah.
And his co-writer on this one, Ray Wright, actually did the update for Pulse, the 2001 J horror.
Sorry, I don't know why that came out of me, but that's fascinating. I remember Pulse.
But it does feel like it is kind of hitting the beats. It feels like, well, we need to make sure that we know who the right people are, we know who to root for, and we're gonna lean all the way to military government bad.
I love how high concept 70s horror movies used to be.
Sure.
Too confusing for modern audiences, not simple enough, not like who's evil, who's good, because back in the 70s it was like no one and everyone, and that's not the point. And that makes it all the more horrifying when things start to go crazy. It's interesting. I wish I'd watched the 2010 and the 73 back to back, because I would have definitely caught that, because I remember really liking the 22, and I think it's still a pretty decent spook house movie. Like it's nothing groundbreaking. It's just fun. I think
that's right. Is that it is absolutely it's a great kind of like popcorn movie. Yeah. Like if you want some horror, here it is. But I think when you compare the two, it's like there's so much more going on in the Romero film. And that may sound like, of course there is, but it's like, it really, like, you can recognize if you watch those two back to back, you go, and it's the same way that, like, when you watch
George Romero is George Romero.
Well, yes, and trusting the audience in the 70s and trying things as opposed to product. Right. Where I feel the same way about Texas Chainsaw 74 versus Texas Chainsaw 2003.
Yeah, it's everything afterwards.
It's like, okay, I see, it's like Texas Chainsaw, they didn't even know what they had.
Right.
And I don't think that, Romero is an intelligent filmmaker. I think he knew what he was trying to say, and it ends up being incredibly effective.
In talking about the editing, like you were saying, like, because that is what that movie. That's what's scary about that movie is there's noises and then quick cut, fire. That burning scene it's still hitting me because, like, you have this kid screaming in the background, you have all this noise, and it's not coming from what you're looking at, and all you're seeing is images of the chaos on that farm. Yeah. But it's not, and it's not like, but it keeps cutting back to people smiling. Like, there's at one point, like, the mom has got this big grin on her face, and I was like, ugh, I hate that. Like, why is that happening? And you're not really entirely sure if she's just is. We're assuming she's infected, but it doesn't explicitly say it. Versus the Olyphant movie, where it's a zombie movie. It's angry zombies. It's angry neighbor zombies. But scary. I will say that it's horror flavored horror.
No, it does. It does what it sets out to do. It's just it's not as nuanced, but I don't think it's not trying to be.
No, it is a really good burger at Culver's. There's really not much to it. It just is what it is. And if that's what you're craving, great. But if you want some, like, Gruyere pear, with a drizzle of some sort of reduced something, Romero movies.
That sounds like a great place to wrap things up because now I'm hungry.
Yeah, I'm starving.
Any final thoughts?
This is one of those things where it's like, I love Shudder and Screambox and all of these streaming services now that are bringing out classics, like from the back of the Blockbuster days, where it was like, when I was a kid, you would go to Blockbuster, your parents would be like, all right, we're going to pick out a movie for tonight, and you would spend like 20 minutes just grazing the horror section. For a fact your parents are not going to let you rent any of these movies, but you get this one chance to, like, pick up the boxes and read the back and look at the art. And then when I got old enough to start renting my own movies, it was like, oh, I can finally dive in here and start grabbing these things. And it because now we've got, like, Shudder, like I say, like, all these streaming services that just is that. Go in hard, because you'll find something like The Crazies, and it feels like it was a movie made for you because no one talks about it. And then you watch it, and it's like you get to have that private moment of going, ooh, this is just a conversation between us right now. And I loved revisiting it, and I think you should too. Well,
this is a movie that I feel like I rediscovered, and it's 50 years old, and I was like, I'm immediately like wanting to run out and be like, hey, have you seen The Crazies? Because I'm confident there are people who are not. So that's why we're going to do these kind of anniversary shows to kind of highlight these films that, they are not the bright and shiny new object. They are, as you said, the classic. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. I am Aaron Christensen. This is Josh Zagoren. And thank you for tuning in for Horror 101 with Dr. AC. Keep searching, keep exploring, keep sharing the scare.